Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first live talk organized by the 19 Million Project and 6 Degrees. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about inclusion under Trump. Ahead of the inauguration in this Friday, we wanted to talk a little bit about what's going to happen with migration and inclusion issues. So before we start, just to let you know what 6 Degrees is. It's a global platform on inclusion and citizenship. And it met last year for the first time in Toronto, and this year it's going to be in The Hague, in Vancouver, and also again in Toronto in September. And the 19 Million Project is a coalition of journalists and media activists and people who work in communications who we're trying to change the way in which migration stories are being told around the world. So today we're with Ahmed, who is a special correspondent for Asia Plus, and with Rafa Fernández from Fusion. Hi.
Hi.
Hey guys.
Okay, so thanks everybody for joining the conversation. If you want to leave questions or comments, please use the hashtag #TalkingInclusion. And just to start, everybody's been talking about what's going to happen with migrants and Muslim people in the US now that Trump is going to take office and after the things he said during his campaign. Let's start with Rafa. What do you think we can expect about Trump's immigration and refugee policies when he takes office?
Well, I think we can expect he's, I don't know if he's going to be able to ramp up deportations immediately. As you guys know, he's promised to immediately deport 2 to 3 million undocumented immigrants with criminal records. If you look at the numbers, no one really knows where Trump got those numbers. There's not that many. There's just not that many immigrants, undocumented immigrants with criminal records in the U.S. Also, there's no real infrastructure to do that. The U.S. agencies are just not capable right now of just handling those kinds of raids or those massive roundups of people. So I think we're not going to see those kinds of deportations, 2 to 3 million. I think he's going to continue this policy like Obama, where they were deporting, 2 to 3 million people over a term of, 4 or 8 years. But I do think what most people are worried about right now is that if, defining immigrants as criminal is part of a policy to get support for hardline immigration policy. So, when you call him, you can call an immigrant that has had a traffic infraction, or, he could be called a criminal just for, violating immigration law. It's not that he committed murder or that he actually, hardline criminals as we come to imagine when you mention the word criminal. But I think the real focus is on what are we going to do with the dreamers, the people that are protected under DACA and are able to study and work in the U.S. They have given all their information to the government. The government knows where they live and knows their names, their age, where they work. And I think that's some of the best young minds the U.S. has right now. So I think there's a lot of worried that in these deportations, the dreamers and the DACA recipients are going to get caught on that, and they're going to get deported.
And
yeah.
One thing, if I may add, I mean, as you were talking, Rafa, I was thinking, you talk about, calling immigrants criminals or equating them to criminals. Trump's done much worse repeatedly throughout the campaign, as you know, equating immigrants and refugees to terrorists, equating refugees to radical Islamic extremists, claiming in a rally in Ohio that, Obama has let in thousands of them, and then he's referring to refugees, but using the term this week, illegals, referring to the Syrian refugees. So to your point, also about the numbers not being clear, even the way in which he refers to these groups isn't clear, and he kind of uses broad strokes, and that's intentional because it gives him more authority and supreme power to make decisions that may very well be arbitrary. I mean, we've heard about him wanting to ban all Muslims, then he's been talking about a Muslim registry when in reality a Muslim registry has already existed since the Bush era, you know, for a decade in this country, up until 2011 when Obama suspended it. There was a Muslim registry that required anyone from 24 Muslim majority countries, mostly Arab countries, you know, as well as North Korea. So 25 countries in total to register. 80,000 people registered. 14,000 people were put into deportation hearings. It was called NSEERS. And, you know, it existed until 2011. So even though it was, you know, conceived during Bush, it existed through Obama. And it was only dismantled this, you know, 2 weeks ago after, you know, 200 plus civil rights organizations and others, you know, appealed to Obama to make these changes before Trump comes in, you know, just like we saw Chelsea Manning being pardoned today. So all these things are in reaction to what everyone expects, which is what Rafa outlined, that Trump's policy will be arbitrary and extreme.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ahmed, right on point. And the tricky question here is how do you call out Trump? He's been very savvy in discrediting the media and actually circumventing the media. He's now going directly to Twitter to make announcements, policy announcements. So
and Rafa, he just announced that he's not going to be using, for example, the POTUS Twitter account, but insisting on using his own personal, which only goes to show that he's going to be doing more of this kind of deflecting, obfuscating, and isolating, and kind of belittling and vilifying the press, just as he's vilified, you know, all kinds of minorities, whether blacks, LGBT, Muslims, you know, repeatedly, Latinos, Mexicans, you know, whether specific or not. It's a very surreal time to be in America if you're thinking about inclusion.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's why we wanted to have this conversation. Just to remind everybody who's watching, if you want to leave any comments or questions for Rafa or Ahmed, please tweet at us using hashtag Talking Inclusion. You can also follow us at 6degrees.to or at 19mm Project to leave your comments. And you were mentioning the role of the media and how Trump uses media, especially social media, to spread out his messages. Being both of you in the media, how do you think we can act, or what do you think the media's role has to be now to be able to like push forward inclusion and to sort of protect or make visible the threats and the issues that are going to be affecting minorities, Latinos, Muslims, and other groups during Trump's presidency? And if you want to start, Ahmed, this time, and then we'll have Rafa commenting on that.
Just about the media, what the media can do.
Mm-hmm. What the media's role should be, and what journalists can do.
Well, specifically in the context of immigration, I think the media needs to point out examples where individuals or communities have had success stories, whether it's about refugees and, you know, programs for sports or cooking, opening up restaurants, or in Lebanon, you know, serving refugees for free. Just these success stories that you know, challenge and push back against these kind of narratives that are reductive and kind of dangerous, where, you know, Trump has been peddling the idea that all refugees are terrorists or pose a threat, or that all Mexicans are immigrants too. And, you know, the media, beyond focusing on those kinds of stories as much as we focus on kind of the political bickering and policy aspect of it, as Rafa mentioned earlier, it's very difficult to challenge someone like Trump. You know, this kind of maniacal disregard for any accountability, both personal and otherwise, in appointing the kinds of people he's appointed. What the media can do is not normalize this. And when I say that, what I really mean is, you know, for example, a lot of the media this week, in anticipation of Inauguration Day, is focusing on, you know, what Trump needs to do in order to not be seen as this and that fascist extreme, or, you know, what he needs to do to and be inclusive. And it's, you know, for as much as that's interesting, it's not particularly productive, because that's what they've been doing for a year. And, you know, there's been no sign that he's changing really, just that he's obfuscating further and vilifying the media. And in doing so, you know, by calling CNN fake news, by kind of lumping in all the media as fake news and using this term, you know, as a noun, that's inaccurate. It's very dangerous. So we need to push back and not normalize it by really trying to keep up with every single lie, which is difficult.
Rafa, thank you.
Well, I think you know, the media needs to go back to investigating. I think we need to uncover a new Watergate. I think there's a lot of potential for that. I think with all the businesses going on, Trump has all over the world, there has to be some conflict of interest there. And I think what you need right now are teams of journalists, basically what the New York Times and the Washington Post did during the campaign, where they had entire teams that were dedicated to Trump. And I think that's what you really need right now. We have to, I guess, for a while, forget about clicks, forget about, you know, just quick hits about how Trump contradicts himself. You need more than that. You need to catch him doing something that's clearly unconstitutional. And I think we've already seen hints of that. You know, he's already, you know, bashing the media. He's already bashing this dossier that went out, which the claims haven't been verified, but he's really at odds with the intelligence community. And I think there could be a lot of whistleblowers coming from these agencies that are not aligned with Trump when it comes to, you know, national security policy, or just, you know, a lot of, you know, people in these agencies, there's a lot of potential for them to turn on the president-elect, on the future president, President Trump. And I think they could eventually become whistleblowers for journalists. But I think, you know, it's going to be tricky again, because he's been very savvy at discrediting the media, at calling out the media's interests, of using social media to circumvent journalists, whether it's just publishing messages on YouTube or he's taking it to Twitter to announce his nominations for his cabinet. And a lot of his supporters do think that the media is obsolete. They think journalists are biased, and they were for Hillary Clinton. Yes, you know, of course, a lot of them were, and a lot of them were for Trump. But it was hard to remain neutral during the campaign, just because of all the things Trump was saying about Mexicans, Muslims. I know Univision, my parent company, came out in a statement and denounced Trump right away, because, you know, a large percentage of its audience is Mexican. So when you have a candidate just calling Mexicans rapists or criminals or drug dealers, it's very hard to remain neutral and not call him out.
And I think it's important to also recognize that we have entered a new era when it comes to a political era, a social era, in no small way kind of, you know, sealed by Trump's election, in which he's advocated for an absolute lack of political correctness. You know, we heard Meryl Streep reference the disabled reporter video. It's a whole new kind of structure in terms of our democracy and how it can be expected to function under an authoritarian power, which is what Trump is, essentially. And the reason I bring this up is because, to Rafa's point, from the media's perspective, you know, aside from the fact that journalism and reporting is not only protected, but is one of the only professions really that's mentioned in the Constitution, you know, as the fourth estate for checks and balances and accountability. I mean, Trump has not only vilified the media, he's vilified anybody who's crossed him, you know, whether it's the intelligence community, whether it's, you know, even members of the Republican Party. I think, you know, what this suggests is that the only way to win is to not necessarily try to aspire to these traditional ideas of what the media means. We have to be real about how we have to operate in an era where Trump may tweet 20 times, fallacies and things that are, you know, have impact foreign level. And, you know, this is what Rafa mentioned, that, you know, there's certain news teams that are now, of course, dedicating resources to people, you know, kind of patrolling Twitter. Even the Chinese government, or, you know, other governments around the world are also appointing people to kind of do that. And so, you know, I guess the last point I'm trying to make is that we need to be as nimble as he is. And so we need to not rely as much on objectivity or trying to be impartial. As we saw, like in the US, for example, NBC's Matt Lauer really fail in one of the debate performances because he was so concerned with not challenging Trump. Even, you know, allegations that the FBI knew about Trump's dossier and yet leaked the Hillary Clinton report. Regardless of which side of the fence you're on, there seems to be this ability for Trump, which Rafael alluded to, that he's able to not be accountable. So, you know, we need to be mindful of how we should operate and focus on being transparent and you know, sticking to the facts. And even if you come across as biased for challenging someone in power, at least it's my personal opinion that especially at times like this, it's all the more important to you know, live up to the idea that journalism is about challenging the comfortable, or afflicting the comfortable even, and comforting the afflicted.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And if you think about civil society, like right now we're seeing women are organizing themselves, and there's going to be a huge march in Washington this Sunday and across the US in different cities. But that's just, it's a great start, but it's the beginning. But do you think other minorities are going to be organizing, or how do you think they could, you know, kind of showing forces to resist possible attacks during Trump's administration?
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll go ahead. Well, first of all, it surprises me now that Trump is president. There's a lot of people that are cozying up to him. You know, he had this meeting with all the big CEOs of Silicon Valley, except Twitter, of course, and they seem to, you know, they seem to be talking now to the president. And you know, it's natural. You know, you now have to follow the will of your stockholders and play nice sometimes with the president, even if you don't agree with them. But I would have expected a little bit more protests from civil society. For example, I can talk about Mexico. Here in Mexico, we're very scared about what's going to happen. Every time Trump sends a tweet, you know, the Mexican peso depreciates further against the dollar. And, you know, when he tweets at all these car companies, they start, you know, going nuts and seeing if they should suspend building the next plant in Mexico. So he has a lot of, you know, crazy power through Twitter. And I think I just would expect more protests here in Mexico. I would expect more protests in the US. I know there's going to be some demonstrations in New York. There's going to be the Women's March in DC, which I expect to be huge. But I would, you know, I just would have thought the country would come at a standstill. I do get the arguments that, you know, it's time to unite after a crazy and long campaign and election. But I do feel a lot of people now are cozying up to him, and I think you know, well, journalists need to be part of that group of people that are going to challenge him. They're going to not only challenge Trump, but challenge his administration. He's building a cabinet of very hawkish figures. Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. You know, he has a history of racial comments, and you know, even in the 80s, when Ronald Reagan tried to nominate him as a federal judge, they wouldn't accept him because of this history he had. So there now seems to be a new standard for these things, where it doesn't really matter what you did. Accountability doesn't matter when it comes to the Trump administration. And I would expect, you know, whether it's women, whether it's, you know, a teacher working in some rural school, whether you're a journalist or an engineer or a filmmaker, I think we all have to come together and defend some of the progress that has been made in immigration and LGBTQ rights. Because as we have learned from, you know, previous years, for example, the Bush presidency, a lot of harm can be done in 4 years. And if Trump was able to win without the real backing of the Republican Party, you know, without huge donations, imagine what he can do with the power of the presidency. I think he, you know, if the economy goes well, if he fulfills some of his promises, but mainly the economy goes well, I think he could be reelected. And a lot of harm can be done in 8 years, as we have seen throughout history.
Mm-hmm. Ahmed, do you want to add something to wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, you know, just Trump's anti-trade policies alone are forcing a lot of governments around the world to recalibrate some of their economic policies and alliances. It seems very obvious for reasons that we could argue about until the sun comes up and goes down and comes up, which is what's been happening here in the U.S. Unfortunately, it seems as though Russia and China, certain countries, are directly benefiting from Trump's election, able to exploit a lot of the shortcomings, poor policy decisions, but also the insecurity and the anxiety that's been caused by this election. Whether we refer to it as the decline of democracy or the decline or the fall of the American empire, as we've seen many empires in the past fall. When it comes to inclusion and citizenship, it seems as though a lot of people are set to suffer all over the world. If you look at the people who've come to Trump's kind of support, it's Hungary's prime minister and a lot of other right-wing extremists, kind of xenophobic, anti-immigrant leaders. And so, at a time when France has, just announced that they're going to be giving tech visas to investors in technology, and even with the threat, so to speak, of Marine Le Pen in France, you're seeing other countries, welcoming refugees, welcoming immigrants. And I think, one thing to remember that's perhaps a glass half full view on a lot of this is that Trump doesn't have a mandate, essentially, despite, the overwhelming support that he managed to conjure from, one segment of the American population, even if he won, for example, white women voters. He lost the popular vote. He's extremely unpopular right now. And I think that is a reminder for all citizens in America and around the world who are concerned about how this might impact them, to also kind of take matters into their own hands. Whether civil disobedience factors into that, I think, as Raphael was making some predictions, it's going to be difficult, I think, for Trump to ignore or avoid the large majority of people that are disillusioned, not only with the Democratic Party, I think, rightfully, but with the Republican Party, as he was referring to, by the fact that Trump was able to win to begin with. So, with all that said, I think, the most important thing to do is not to normalize this, and as journalists, not to, for example, trade in access for, challenging the president, and then to expose, things that, rather than talk about what Trump should do, talk about what Trump is doing.
Mm-hmm. True. One of our followers, Munir Nasri, is watching the talk, and he comments like, he's asking if inclusion is even a valid term under Trump, since he excluded everyone. I think we've covered this question, but just to go forward to the next topic, you were mentioning a little bit about the global impact that his decisions might have, and considering the big refugee flows around the world and migrant flows as well. How do you think these Trump's policies? How do you think these policies will impact elsewhere? Like, if you think about the refugee crisis, about the Middle East, about the situation in Syria, will there be any consequences during Trump's administrations in that area?
I think Trump has been very vocal in terms of, his criticism of Germany and Angela Merkel and calling it a catastrophe, but he's also been very ignorant and revealed kind of an embarrassment about America, which is, despite our very rigorous immigration policy, we've only let in, 10,000, 12,000 refugees. And obviously it's quite different than Europe because they're not arriving on our shores and haven't been. History will, Trump's election and his plans are going to reverberate, and history, he will be remembered accordingly. And the reason I say that is I think his isolationist policies, just to tie your two questions quickly, the one from the viewer and your own, one thing that's made Trump so effective is his ability to vilify everyone. So to be so exclusive or exclusionary that inclusivity may seem irrelevant, as the viewer referred to. And, that's going to, I think, in the long run, if he doesn't, succumb to impeachment or whatever, which is always an option, I really do think that he's going to have a lot of pushback and run into a lot of problems from people, from the majority that may form a coalition, having felt completely excluded. I mean, history teaches us one thing: if a population feels misrepresented for a long time, which Americans already have, just judging by Congress's abysmal approval ratings and the disillusionment with the two parties, I think eventually it catches up to you. You know, Obama in his farewell address said one thing that resonated for me, and I think whether intentionally or not could have been addressed directly to Donald Trump. He said, and he was referring to, you know, the fact that a lot of Democrats were critical of Trump, but not looking as critically at themselves and for some of the DNC's shortcomings. Immediately after that, he said, reality has a way of catching up to you. And I think, you know, considering the fact that Trump has insisted on creating an alternate reality and living in it where facts don't matter, and, you know, all that matters are perceptions and emotions and fear, I think he's doing himself a disservice in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And Rafa, what do you think the impact of his policies will be on Latin America and Central America, Mexico, especially being so close?
Well, I mean, you're talking about a guy that's trying to build a wall, which it's just a ridiculous policy, and even as a statement, it's ridiculous in this time and age. It just reminds you of Berlin. It reminds you of everything that's backwards. Now, you know, he's saying that he wants U.S. taxpayers to pay for the wall for the sake of speed. Mexico keeps insisting it's not going to pay for the wall. The Trump administration, I think, says that they could ultimately pay for this wall by putting tariffs on Mexican exports, or just, you know, different ways that they could, I guess, force the Mexican government to pay indirectly for the wall. But I think that sense, whether a wall is built, whether a budget for that crazy policy is approved by Congress, I don't know. I want to doubt it, but, you know, since Trump won, I really don't doubt anything. I think anything is possible. But I do think just talking about a wall, discussing that in Congress, sends it's very symbolic. It sends a very clear message to Mexico and the rest of Latin America, for that matter, especially Central America. As you know, it's mostly Central Americans and other nationalities that are coming through Mexico, trying to reach the U.S. After they got rid of the wet foot, dry foot policy, Cubans will join the ranks of these immigrants that are trying to make their way through Mexico to get to the U.S. And I think that just, you know, it evidences this policy of isolation, of trade barriers. You know, he's also been very outspoken about renegotiating NAFTA, the free trade agreement between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, where, you know, in the last 20 years, our North American economies have become very integrated. For example, about 40% of the materials Mexico uses to manufacture come from the U.S. So in a way, if you hit Mexico, you're also hitting U.S. jobs. I've talked to several experts in this, and they estimate around 5 million jobs depend indirectly on trade with Mexico. And, you know, also the real enemy here is not only Mexican workers, but automation. A lot of the manufacturing sector is now, a lot of workers are being replaced by robots. You know, it sounds like sci-fi, but it's true.
No,
automation,
you know,
real here, and you can't really fight automation. You can't postpone the future, but you can't win against the future.
Well,
but Trump is taking workers as scapegoats, and I think you have to be really clear on the facts. The real trouble for U.S. jobs here, or for manufacturing jobs, is automation, not Mexican workers.
Yeah. You know, one thing I think it's important quickly to bring up, you're talking about the future and jobs and Trump, and, you know, when you look at climate change, he thinks it's a Chinese hoax. He said that repeatedly, not just on one occasion. And then if you contrast that with the fact that the Chinese just 2 weeks ago announced that they're investing in the next 3 years $360 billion in renewable. They are the, you know, market leaders when it comes to wind and solar. They are going to be creating 13 million jobs in doing that. And, you know, the U.S. was poised to also benefit and be a leader. You know, our solar power has tripled in the last 3 years alone. You know, and you have Trump, who's doubling down on fossil fuels. You hear, you know, Rafa talking about the fact that, you know, the EPA, you know, the Environmental Protection Agency, Trump not only wanted to get rid of it altogether, but his nomination of the person to head it, is someone who's not only a climate change denier, arguably, but someone who has all sorts of, business conflicts, as is the case with many of them. The reason I bring this up is because I think, even though climate change may not always, weigh heavily on people's minds, from a moral perspective, from a business perspective, the U.S., is poised to gain so many jobs. There are more jobs in solar and in wind than there are in construction, in oil and kind of traditional fossil fuel construction. And yet Trump is doubling down on the fossil fuel industry. And so I think that's just another indication of how much we are poised to lose things we don't even, have, kind of opportunities that will be squandered.
And just to add on that, I think, talking about China, I think we're going to see, we could also be seeing a new world order where the Chinese or even the Russians take charge of world affairs.
Well, I think that's happened, quite frankly. I mean, I really do think, I hate to interject, but so often we talk about how global alliances are shifting. I mean, he's going to Russia as his first foreign trip as president, not to Britain. The way he talks about allies as compared with the way he talks about Putin. And beyond all these kind of political examples, if you just look at how Russia has been operating in Syria, the biggest war since World War II, and you see who's leading, the U.S. didn't even know under Obama, forget Trump. I mean, the U.S. didn't even know that a ceasefire was being signed between the Iranians, between the Turks, between the Russians. The way, China, as you said, and Russia are kind of doing this, I think it's already happened. I could be wrong, but.
Okay, so I think we have to go wrapping up. We are talking with Ahmed and Rafa, and the hashtag is Talking Inclusion, if you want to send some last minute comments. And the last question I have for you is, we talked about the role the media has to have, but citizens and regular people, do you think people now have a responsibility to be more informed? And how can we contribute to actually fostering inclusion in the US and in a more at a community level?
You want me to answer first?
Rafa, you want to start?
Sure. Well, I think we already know who Trump is. I think, yes, we need to be informed, but I think it's also time to take to the streets. No one is going to give you your rights. You have to take them, right? No one is going to give Mexican immigrants their rights just because they want to be nice with them, just because they think it's good policy, just because they think it's good PR. Mexican immigrants need to fight for them. We need to take them from their hands, and we need them to feel our presence, whether that means voting with their wallet. Mexicans in the U.S., Latinos, we have massive purchasing power. So why don't we start, boycotting the companies that are making, playing nice and are not questioning all the moves by the incoming administration? Why don't we really start voting with our wallets, with how we talk to people, or just how we denounce things? I think, perhaps it's not only a time to get more informed, but a time to take action. And I think we, this thing where we're just waiting to see what happens, or we're just waiting to see if Trump really goes ahead and fulfills some of his promises, I think we're going to get screwed if we keep waiting. I think it's time to really go out and figure out ways where we can really hit him where it hurts. Whether it's boycotting certain companies, certain corporations, whether it's donating to, the ACLU, which has promised to take Trump to court if he infringes the Constitution or the rights of people. I think it's time to really put your money where your mouth is, and stop pretending that you're going to be neutral, or just stop hoping for the best, because it's going to be a tough year. People were making all these jokes on social media about how they wanted 2016 to come to an end. Well, it's just a date, right? It's just symbolism. I think 2017 is going to be a year like no other, where, like we said, there's going to be a new world order. There's a guy in the White House that's very erratic, very much like a big baby. And I don't think our policy should be to police him. I don't think our policy should be to wait and see if he likes us. I think we need to stand up and really, you know, and fight the power.
Mm-hmm. Ahmed, do you have anything to add to that? Ahmed, hi. I think Ahmed lost his connection. We'll wait to see if he is online again so that he can answer. But thanks, Rafa, and thanks, Ahmed. This was the first live talk we organized with the 19 Million Project and 6 Degrees. If you want to be updated on the two projects, you can follow at 6 Degrees TO and at 19MM Project. Also, stay tuned. We're going to have more of these live talks to talk about inclusion, migration, issues related to refugees and the refugee crisis. And was today with Ahmed Shihab-Eldin from AJ+. I don't know if Ahmed, I think we lost him, but we were just wrapping up, so it's fine. Thank you very much, Rafa, and thanks everybody for watching and following. Thanks for your questions too.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye, thank you.